Welcome everyone to the first episode of ECEGSA's research seminar series. Today we have my good friend Maxine and our distinguished guest Dr. Chong, who is a professor at the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department and also acting head currently. So, how are you doing, Dr. Chong?
I'm doing fine. With all these things going on right now, as you can imagine, there are a lot of issues to deal with, but things are going smoothly. So I hope everyone sort of takes comfort in that.
Yeah, awesome. That's good to hear.
I hope everyone else is doing well as well. I can see both of you look like you're doing quite well.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you. Yeah, thank you again for agreeing to be featured on our research series. I think we just get started with our questions. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up at, and how did you first get interested in electrical engineering?
Yes, sure. So I grew up in Malaysia, just outside of Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital of Malaysia. Um, when I was in high school, I was among a group of students who started a club called the Electronics Club. Because at that time, I mean, we're now talking about around 1979 or 1980. It was kind of a time for electronics to be booming. And, as enthusiasts in high school, we were all kind of trying to get into it and learn how to do things like design circuits and things like that. So that's really how I got interested in electrical and computer engineering. Now at that time, computers they weren't that big yet. You couldn't really go out and buy, a personal computer and kind of play around with it. But a few years later, you could. And I actually got one. It was really expensive, so I had to buy a second-hand version of it after saving a lot of money when I was in high school. But it was a TRS-80 computer, kind of like a PC. Well, I mean, it didn't do very much, but it had a Z80 microprocessor, and that's how I learned to do assembly language programming. um, so yeah, that's how I got into it. I finished the last 2 years of my high school in Adelaide, which is in South Australia. And then I went to the University of Adelaide, and that's where I went to college and got my bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering.
Oh, that's fascinating. Do you have any memory of one of the cool projects you did in the past when you were in the student club? Or I guess what inspired you to be interested in computers?
So I was very much into sort of building audio equipment at the time, kind of listening to music and kind of designing preamps and power amplifiers. And, it's sort of the macho thing to do, right? Kind of the more powerful a power amp you can build, sort of the more impressive it is. So that was the kind of thing I used to. The other thing I used to build a lot was sort of noise making machines. I remember once I built this black box which produces siren sounds of all kinds. It's like square wave siren sounds and sinusoidal siren sounds and triangular wave siren sounds. Sounds like ambulance type of sirens. Yeah, just lots of little noisy things like that.
Did you use the siren on like other people to prank them?
Yeah, it was very realistic sounding. The siren sounds that came out of this black box that I built. And by the way, this sort of thing that we used to do, I had to do everything from scratch. So I had to design the printed circuit board layout by hand, and then I had to kind of do the artwork and etch the circuit board with ferric chloride and that kind of stuff, and then do all the soldering and drilling all the holes and everything all by myself.
How did you figure out how to do all of those? Because I guess Google was not a thing back then.
No. I mean, I guess you ask people and you look at what people do and you go with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you talked a little bit about your college and high school experience in Australia. Were you able to narrow your interests down to your current area back in college, or how did you actually do that?
That's a very good question. And in fact, it's sort of a journey that I do relate to my students from time to time. The fact is, I changed my research areas several times. So when I was a senior in college, I was very interested in computer networks. So my senior design project, actually my honors project, was to build it was a very interesting object. It was basically an adapter for a kind of local area network called a token ring local area network. And this adapter basically is to encode voice to be communicated over a token ring network. Now, I mean, at that time, it was kind of high-tech stuff. Today it's probably very, very old hat. So that's what I did. And then when I started graduate school, the first research topic that I started with was VLSI. So I was doing VLSI designs, and at that time, CAD tools were very new. So the kind of CAD tools I used were very, very primitive, but still they were cutting edge at the time because that's what we did at the university. And then I met a computer science professor when I was in grad school. I met him at dinner one day. We were having dinner at sort of the same sort of eating place that we had for scholars and so forth. And he got me interested in doing some work on task scheduling. He asked me, hey, do you understand queuing theory? Do you know how to calculate probabilities for Markov chains? And I actually did. It's not something that most new graduate students understood at the time, but somehow I was interested in it, and I studied that by myself, and I knew how to do these things. So as soon as he asked me about it, I could work on it immediately, and I ended up writing a couple of journal papers with this computer science professor, and these were probably 2 or 3 of my first journal papers, if you look at my list of publications. So, so I was in that area for a while doing that. And my VLSI work was kind of put to the side. This was all at the University of Adelaide. Then I moved to Princeton to do my PhD. And when I started in Princeton, I decided that I wanted to do image processing. Because that was becoming really big at the time. So I worked under one of the big and great image processing professors. His name was B.D. Liu. And I actually was the TA for the very first image processing course that was taught at Princeton. I wrote all the labs up and things like that. Again, it's kind of primitive in today's standards, but at that time it was kind of it was cool stuff, doing very fancy image processing things on the computer. Computers were slow then, so we couldn't do very, very fancy things. But then when I was in Princeton, there were a lot of seminars given by invited speakers, and I really got interested in sort of the very mathematical aspects of certain parts of electrical engineering, namely having to do with online optimization of stochastic systems. And so I ended up doing my PhD dissertation in that topic. So that was my fourth topic, if if you're counting, maybe even fifth if you include my interest when I was a senior in college. So, and since then, I've changed and done all kinds of different things since my PhD. I've worked in areas such as manufacturing, which is long, like 20 something years ago, that was kind of big. I worked in wireless systems and wireless networks and wireless data when it was big, and then sort of next generation internet. And after that, I got into some signal processing when I moved to CSU in 2001. And I started working with Professor Louis Scharf, and he taught me a lot of signal processing, and I did signal processing with him. And then we did some work on adaptive sensing, which is sort of combined signal processing with control. So all kinds of stuff. I should mention that from the year 1991, when I got my PhD, to the year 2001, when I moved to CSU, during that 10-year period, I was on the faculty at Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. And that school is totally different. It's huge compared to, our department in ECE here at CSU. So the experience there was quite different than how things are like here.
So how was it like in Purdue? How's your experience just in general with graduate school, especially on the topic of graduate student organization? Did you have interaction with their ECEGSA at Purdue?
As far as I can remember, they did not have an ECEGSA at Purdue at the time. However, today they have a very vibrant ECEGSA, and I know that because I visited their website and took a look at what they were up to. But nonetheless, of course, I worked a lot with graduate students at the time. I had my own group of graduate students, and I taught courses which were courses to graduate students, a lot of graduate courses. Actually, probably more than half of the courses I taught at Purdue were graduate courses. The graduate students at Purdue were very different from the graduate students at Princeton, or at least the experience that I had at Princeton. So when I was in Princeton, I was very close to my office mates, even though they were in different areas, and we talked a lot. We discussed all kinds of technical issues, and I find out what they were doing. I try to understand some of their problems. I describe my problems to them, and because of that, we sort of grew intellectually together very, very closely. One of the things we did at Princeton that was, I thought, very, very useful was that a group of graduate students in my office, myself and a bunch of other of my friends, decided that we would organize a seminar series by ourselves, and we would take turns to give talks on contemporary topics that were of interest at the time. So, for example, I remember I volunteered at that time to give a talk on fractals. Everyone was talking about fractals, and we didn't know what it was, so we wanted to find out. And I studied up on fractals, and I gave a talk on it. And somebody else would give a talk on something else that was interesting at the time. And one of the great things was that we organized the seminar. We advertised it to the entire department. And then the professors would come to our seminar and listen to our talk because they were interested in that topic too. And that experience was great for us as graduate students because, first of all, we learned so much. Second of all, we got to interact with professors on a level that was sort of akin to just, discussing research topics and technical topics almost as peers, because I studied up the topic. The professor doesn't, the professors who came to the talk doesn't know, they didn't know much about that topic, but yet they listened to my talk and they very quickly could understand it and they could contribute to the discussion, and it was a great time. Everyone, had a wonderful time. When I went to Purdue, I tried to encourage my graduate students to do the same thing. It was difficult to get them to do that. I think partly because, uh, I think graduate students have to develop this passion by themselves. If they're told to, hey, organize this thing and do this like I did it, that's not something they came up by themselves, and it's not going to work very well. So I think graduate students really have to find their own passion and take the initiative to do something like that, and then it works. It works great. And you guys started the ECEGSA as founding members and officers, and I think that's fantastic. It will be a great contribution to the graduate community in our department, and it also allows you to develop your passions and exercise your passions the way you're doing now. So I really congratulate you for doing that, and you have my admiration.
Thank you. That was a really inspiring story.
So, shifting gears a little bit now towards academics and research. So, you mentioned it briefly. What are some of the topics that you are currently working on in your lab, or what are some of the topics which interest you the most right now?
My graduate students in my group do a variety of things. Um, I have, for example, one graduate student who works on doing financial time series prediction, you know,
Mm.
to predict stock prices, make a lot of money. Don't try it at home. Uh, I have, another couple of graduate students who work on wireless systems and 5G and that sort of thing. And but one of the interesting projects that I have going right now, which is a project in collaboration with some colleagues from the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. This project is on how to make decisions under uncertainty at the community level to bring a community back to food secure status after a hazard. So by hazard, we mean things like an earthquake or a flood or even a war or something like that. And when something like that happens, one of the immediate things that happen is that food security goes down a lot, and this is one of the important things that we have to bring back up. And so, how do you make decisions in the community to bring the community back to food secure status? For example, how do you deploy the limited resources you have? Right, you have people that have to go, for example, fix a bridge or bring back a power plant to operational level, or fix a part of the water network to restore that. Um, this is a very interesting topic for me because for many years I've been interested in the problem of decision making under uncertainty. It's sort of a problem that falls within the area of control systems and control theory, but not in the classical sense, like, controlling a servo motor or an aircraft or something like that. It's more at a sort of a higher level of abstraction. Now we're talking about controlling decision actions, right? Um, uh, that are sort of at an abstracted level. I've been very interested in topics like that for a while, and in our group we have developed some effective methods for solving these types of problems. And so we brought our know-how and our methodology to bear on this problem, which really is a problem that comes from the civil and environmental engineering field.
Awesome. That's really interesting. And I'm sure many of the students watching this will contact you for doing research now. But as you mentioned, your students are working on all these interesting topics in different fields. So, are there skills required to do research in those fields? When I started doing research, I found out it's a lot more than just doing an assignment. You need like patience and then perseverance in the face of obstacles. So some things like that.
Yes, indeed. Doing research is in some ways difficult, but in other ways very exhilarating. Now, maybe many people already know from taking my classes that probably the two most important uh, topics that have to be mastered to do the kind of work that my students do are optimization and stochastic processes. Um, and as many of the graduate students know, these two topics require a strong underlying mathematical background, you know, and we're talking about things like linear algebra and calculus, analysis, and and maybe even some more advanced topics in mathematics that are not so commonly, I suppose, encountered in electrical engineering, such as you know differential geometry or topology or even group theory. Um, Now, you asked this question about perseverance and that sort of thing. What does one do when you face obstacles in research, right? Uh, and I tell my students that very commonly graduate students doing research will come to a point where they'll ask themselves, uh, why am I not making any progress? I mean, what am I doing? What am I doing here? I feel like a failure. I just don't seem to be getting anything. Um, and I always tell them that, first of all, that experience is extremely common. It's very, very common, and students do get discouraged when that happens to them. The fact is, and I've seen this from my, 20 something PhD students that I myself have supervised and graduated. The fact is that most PhD students, I would say all of them, their trajectory looks something like this. First year, nothing. Second year, nothing. Third year, nothing. It's really in that final year when virtually everything sort of comes out, the output increases dramatically all at the end. So that's when all their papers get published, that's when they get all their results, that's when they finally decide that, hey, I really know something about this topic and I'm an expert at this topic and I'm confident at it. I've embraced it as my own research area and my own passion. And then, and I now know how to write papers and I have results to put in my paper and things like that. All happens at the end. And really, when a PhD student does their final examination, their dissertation defense, that's when they're really hitting the ground running. And that's when they're really, really proficient already and expert at what they're doing. And unfortunately, that's also when they leave my group and go somewhere else. Just when I've trained them for several years to be extremely good at doing those things that we would like them to do. So yes, indeed, perseverance, um, and a kind of boldness, I guess, with kind of just going forward despite the fact that you really don't know what's going to happen. That's the kind of thing that is required, and that's why you really have to do what you love doing, because if it's not something you love doing, you're not going to get through that kind of experience very well and come out, with confidence and with sort of general happiness about your life and your predicament that you find yourself in.
Yeah, that's really helpful. As you mentioned, students in their last year start publishing papers and then writing thesis and things like that to graduate. Do you have like any sort of general advice on like how to write papers or how to write a good thesis?
This is what I tell a lot of PhD students at the start of their research sort of years. First, these days, all PhD students are expected to write and publish journal papers, much more actually than it used to be, let's say, 30 years ago. Uh, because of that, I tell them that writing journal papers is probably what they should really just focus on and not worry too much about the dissertation. And the reason is this: once you've written your however many journal papers that your advisor thinks that you should produce, some people it's one or two or three, and some other people they'll produce like 4, 5, 6. I've had students just like that as well. Now, I mean, the act of the whole process of producing a peer-reviewed journal paper is, it's a long and somewhat grueling process, because you have to go through peer review and revisions and editing, and sometimes redoing experiments and replotting graphs and getting new results, things like that, right? When you do your revisions. And, reviewers are brutal, right? Reviewers have no mercy. They're anonymous, so they can say whatever they want. And they will really say things that sometimes will be very discouraging to graduate students. So you got to get used to that sort of thing, develop a little bit of a thick skin when you read that, and don't take it too much to heart, or take it personally. It's just a commentary on the fact that, okay, you need to revise your work and do something a little bit different. But the advantage of just focusing on these journal papers is the following: once you've written, let's say 3 journal papers, those papers become essentially the core content of your PhD dissertation. In fact, they almost can be, cut and paste into chapters of your PhD dissertation. For example, if you have 3 journal papers, you got 3 core chapters. And then all you have to do really to produce a dissertation is write a coherent introduction for all these, 3 chapters or so, and write a coherent conclusion and some future directions. And there you go. You got your dissertation written, right? And not only that, it's already been edited. It's already been, been through the process of rewriting, so it's clear, all the graphs are properly plotted, the fonts are not too small, because your reviewers have already complained about all these things, right? So by that time, it's all pretty much peer reviewed, and you could say perfect, at least to the extent of being publishable, right? And you're not going to get a lot of complaints at that time from your committee members. So you kill multiple birds with one stone if you do that. And one of the things about the whole process of going through doing research and getting things published is that doing research itself is very open-ended. You don't know where you're headed very often. It's sort of like you're feeling your way in a dark room, and really all you can see is, the sort of the horizons of where your little LED flashlight, shines, and that's all you can see. You don't know what's beyond that, and yet you have to push the boundaries beyond that horizon, right? So you're working in the dark a lot of the time in research. However, going through the process of, let's say, managing a project, uh, creating a plan, a project plan, a timeline, having short-term goals, long-term goals, writing papers and just scheduling your time according to doing that. Those things are very structured. And very often students find that in the midst of this very open-ended sort of activity that they have to do in doing research, that the structure provides them with stability and with kind of a security about what they need to do and what they can expect to happen in the near future, in the medium future, and to some extent also in the longer term. So you have to balance these two aspects of your work and of your activities, and sometimes when you have discouraging events happen to you in research, such as your paper got rejected and the reviewers were very critical of you, then you focus on the very structured things that you need to get done, and how you have to do to be successful, and just do them. And then eventually the other side gets sorted out all by itself automatically as well.
So moving on to my next question. So you mentioned some of the technologies that you were interested in back in high school, or some of the projects that you worked on. Those are like really important technologies, but now the world has have things like internet or machine learning. So in the future, what technologies or science do you see having as drastic impact as internet or AI?
That's a very good question, very interesting question, and I do think about these things from time to time when I when I get a chance to ponder these things. One of the biggest changes that have taken place that have impacted, I would say, my own research areas uh, is the fact that computational power has increased so tremendously during the last 30 years of my research career, and that changes a lot of things because of the great computational power that exists now. We can do so many things, and the internet, of course, grew out of that, and this dissemination of data and information and knowledge over networks is just tremendous. And now, of course, people, as you say, talk about the idea of uh, actually creating artificially intelligent machines. Now, for me, one of the most intriguing implications of that for the future is the observation that with every passing year, currently, the lifespan, our lifespan, is increasing. So every year, if you measure the statistics of average lifespan, it's going up. Every year it's going up. Every year it's going up. And if you draw that graph, there'll come a time in the somewhat near future, not very far away, if you just sort of extrapolate, when with every passing year, the average life expectancy increases by more than 1 year. Now, the implication of that is that there's the potential that there will be people, people on Earth like us, who will have their lifespan increased by more than 1 year with every passing year. That means that potentially they sort of can just keep living on and on and on, because medical technology and technology will just keep improving and we'll just keep them alive. With every passing year, their horizon for being alive is just going further and further into the future. And so what does that mean? I mean, are they going to live forever? What does that mean? I mean, I suppose you have to be open to the idea that, living forever means replacing parts of your body with, artificial parts. Some of you know that my own body has some artificial parts already. I do have a prosthetic right leg, which by the way is computer controlled, it's microprocessor controlled. I have to charge it every day like my cell phone. So you have to be open to these kind of possibilities, and maybe even the possibility of having to replace parts of your own brain. Maybe you have to download your brain state into some machine or something, right, in the future. Now, I mean, it sounds fantastical right now, but hey, who knows, right? In the future, things will be totally different. You can't even imagine it very easily today. So, these are the kinds of things that are really intriguing about what could happen in the future. And the really surprising thing about it is that horizon, this time, this extrapolation for when that would happen, when potentially people can sort of live forever, so to speak, quote unquote, that's not very far away. I mean, we're talking 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's that kind of time span. That's the kind of time span when you guys are likely to still be alive and experience it. Now, how exciting is that for you, right? Now, will I experience it in my lifetime? Well, I can hope that I will, but for you guys, you have a much higher probability of reaching that point and seeing these things happen. In my own lifetime, I've already seen fantastic things happen. I mean, like just fantastic things, right? When I started being a professor, there was no World Wide Web. And then the World Wide Web came on board, and I wrote my own HTML program for my website, and some of that code is still in my current website from 30 years ago. I mean, incredible what has happened since then. What's going to happen in the next 30 years for all of you? Well, you can only dream about those things. And I think it's going to be an extremely, extremely exciting time to be alive.
That's really fascinating. And with the like speed of research increasing or accelerating, I should say, every year, it looks like we'll have some interesting technologies. The last question I have is, we talked about your professional career, the research you did. So what sort of like professional accomplishments are like most gratifying to you?
Yes, I think probably without question, I would say my most gratifying accomplishment is what is represented by the accomplishments of my PhD students and and the students who I think I've interacted with in my career. Now, among my own graduate students, among my own former PhD students, all of them have been extremely successful. I mean, very, very successful. At least 4 of them are IEEE fellows. One of them is a chaired professor at a university. A couple of them have become extremely rich, certainly more wealthy than I could ever dream of. So, I mean, of course, these are fairly superficial things, but I think the fact that I played a role in their lives and in their future and in where they went, and I've maintained my relationships with them, has been extremely gratifying and extremely satisfying for me as well. I mean, my own career, I can't complain about my own successes. I've been very lucky, and I've been able to interact with extremely smart people and creative people. And so I'm totally happy with how my career has gone. But I look at some of my past students, and their careers have far exceeded my own, and I feel extremely gratified by that.
Awesome. That's really really nice to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say it's the art of being a teacher and professor, being able to be a part of so many people's life and get to witness their growth. And we really thank you for doing that for us right now. Real quick, because I think we are running a little bit out of time. So I recently learned that you are a part of a band that plays locally. Could you tell me about your band and where do you guys play, or how did you guys meet?
So so far I've been in many bands already. I play several instruments. I play electric guitar, acoustic guitar, bass guitar, even the upright bass. I do play that, and even a mandolin. I've played that.
Oh wow.
But my current band, the band I'm currently in, is a trio. A percussionist, a singer-songwriter who plays an acoustic guitar, and I play a fretless bass guitar in this band, and we do perform locally. You're right. Right now, of course, we're a bit stuck because there's no public performing of any kind. But hey, who knows? In the fall, maybe next summer, you'll see our band playing again. Our band is called the Choice City Trio. We are going to have a website up and running very soon, and we're going to post some material up there as well, some of our songs. So do look out for it. Unfortunately, I don't have my instrument currently because it's in one of my band members' place, because that's where we jam. So I'm not able to play anything for you, but I would expect that in the near to medium term, you'll be able to access some of our music.
Yeah, thank you again for giving us this time to get to know you. So, do you have some words of encouragement for our viewers or people who want to be engaged in researches?
Sure. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me in this interview. I have really enjoyed sharing some of my experiences, and this is my encouragement to you. I myself am looking forward to following the trajectory of your careers. Some of you, I know, I will continue to communicate with for the rest of my life. I hope you will try to keep in touch with me as well, and let me know how you're doing or what you're doing. But I know that you guys have such a bright and promising future, and I really want to see what that looks like for you as well. So I am looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well, to your own future careers.
Thank you, Dr. Chong. It was really nice talking with you. Thank you for being our first guest on behalf of ECEGSA.
My main research interests are in modeling, analysis, simulation, optimization, and control of networks and wireless systems.